here when I first started. I was in my bedroom against the wall doing these, and then I moved into a living room where I had more space. But it was like there's a disconnect. Like you have these people on a yacht or, in these big, huge, exclusive houses, and then there's me sitting in my bedroom recording, asking these questions as if I'm a huge time business owner. The simple advice is, if you're not going to do it, someone else is going to do it for you, and you're going to lose out.
Hello, everyone. This is Peter Murphy Lewis. I'm thrilled to be taking over the famous Invest in Yourself podcast today. You may have heard of my colleague, Kyle Kudareski from webstreet.co, share his insights on this very show back in March of 2024. I was so inspired by this conversation and the podcast host himself, Phil Better, that I wanted to flip the mic, and get to know Phil and hear his story and his passion. Today, we're going to dive deep into what drives people like Phil, help others elevate their lives, careers, and financial well-being. Let's get to it. Phil, welcome to your own show.
It's very weird being interviewed for my own show. I don't know how I like it yet, but I'm very excited to see what kind of questions you have for me in this wonderful world of podcasting interviews.
I want to start off with what you just told me you do on Mondays, because that is exciting. Tell me, how do you relax on a Monday when you are not doing your 400 plus, 500 plus interviews?
So I am a giant child. I have yet to grow up. So I play video games. I just sit in my bed with a remote and I just play Call of Duty, Rocket League, Spider-Man, Harry Potter. I play all the games just to remove the stress of running a business or running a podcast empire, if you will. I just like relaxing and not doing anything too stressful.
I love it. I think that if you were listening to this podcast for the first time, you might think that's not investing in yourself, but you and I know better. That is investing in yourself. What other unique ways do you invest in yourself that don't go with the traditional way of, reading business books and thinking about money?
I listen to dark classical music when I do my walks. Back in 2020, at the beginning of 2020, I was 300 pounds. And I needed to lose weight because I was not a happy person and I was not in a good place. So I started walking, and we're just doing 10,000 steps. And I found you can listen to the podcast and get, motivation for that. But for some reason, one day I just put on a dark classical music playlist, and it just motivated me to walk more. For some really weird reason, whenever I do walks, I have to listen to dark classical music because it allows my brain just to just stop thinking, which is a big problem I have. It just constantly goes, so that the dark classical music just lets me to zone out, and I don't even realize I'm walking 2-3 kilometers at a time.
It's not a perfect parallel, but I do something odd with classical music. When I am running, and I trained for an ultra marathon about
You're
3
insane.
or 4 years ago.
You're insane.
I trained a large part of it in a cemetery listening to classical music.
So instead of having the dark music, you went to a dark place. Okay, I understand it. It's very similar.
So when I was preparing for this, I was going over the notes on our first chat, and I asked you, why do you do this? And the very first words that came out of your mouth is, I want to help people change their lives for the better. What does that mean for you? How do you execute that? How did you get to that mission?
I've always been someone who loves helping people, whether it's hey, I need help moving, or I have this problem, can you help out? And they just talk to me. It's something that's always been in me, be it from a very young age, helping people. It's always been something that's been a driver for me. And when I moved into the entrepreneurial space with my podcast, I realized that I had this opportunity that not only will the people I'm interviewing help me, but the advice that I get from that will help people who are listening. So it really came from a part of me that's always been there, is helping people. How can I help you get better at your life so that you have not an easier life, but a simpler way of doing things? Because a lot of things, people overcomplicate their lives by saying, I have to do this, and this. And it's no, you want to be happy, you just do that. Forget about all the middle stuff. You want to do something, just do the final step. What is the final step? It's be happy. Okay. The first thing is just think happy thoughts. And people are like, oh, but happy thoughts don't work. It doesn't work right away. It will take your time for you to reprogram your brain to get those happy thoughts. Or, hey, I want to be a podcaster. Just start. I want to be an entrepreneur. Just start. There's nothing in between doing the execution. You don't have to plan. Don't do anything. Just try, get your hands dirty, and then you'll know what you don't know. And that's where you can start learning to make yourself better. And it's just me constantly trying to tell people, like, 90% of people don't know shit. And the other 10% don't know what they don't know. And they just do it anyways.
Where did that helping others come from? I know like that, I think you and I have that in common. I would attribute a large percentage of that in me from growing up in a small town of 2,000 people, where helping might be the only thing great you do in your life, and your last name is attached to it. But where did yours come from?
I want to say it's because I'm Canadian, but I honestly, I couldn't tell you. I've always had this place that people would come and talk to me about their issues or problems, and either they just vent it out, and I'll be like, "Ah, cool," and I know I'm helping them in some way by being that sounding board, that just like that void that they can just scream into and be like, "Okay, I get everything off," and it doesn't really bother me. And then I say, "Okay, you can try this. This may work." And I've always had that like really positive mentality for others and helping others, but for myself, that it's taken time for me to learn how to be positive to myself, because I'm uber critical of myself for some reason. But it's always been a part of me. I don't know if there was a moment that it just snapped and I was like, okay, this is how I do it. I just like helping people. It's like born into me. I don't know. Maybe my father, because he used to do a lot of charity work. He actually started the precursor to the Kids Help phone line in Quebec, where I'm from, when he was young. So I guess just hearing stories about him doing stuff like that maybe pushed me onto the path. But that's probably the biggest driver. Is like I'm Canadian, and what my dad used to do when he was younger than I am now.
Tell me about, I want to get into the minutia of your podcast. I know that you like to geek out about podcasts. Tell me some type of feedback that you've received from a listener, someone in your audience, that it might just be as small as, hey, I listened to this, on a road trip across Arkansas and this resonated with me. Or it might be something like, hey, you remind me of this person in my life. Thank you for being an inspiration. Like, what's an email that you, or some type of feedback you've received that you still remember, you check it off as this is a badge of honor of something that I've done. I've impacted somebody's life for the better.
To be honest, I've yet to receive feedback from an audience member, which is, as a podcaster, it's normal unless you're like this huge, or you end up having this large guest on. But I have received compliments from guests. And I think that for me probably is a bit more powerful. I had one guest tell the story of Jesus being touched by a whole bunch of people. And there's this lady just crawling. She's like, if I just touch his hem, I'll be healed. I'm paraphrasing, and I apologize to any Christians out there that know the story much better than I am. I'm not hugely Christian or follow that, but she's crawling through and she finally touches the hem of his clothing. And he goes, who just touched me? Because they like drew out the power, like drew Jesus's power for healing and all that, instead of like the whole story on that. And she said that with the questions I asked, it was like drawing the power out of people. It was really touching, because it's like, first of all, you have this person that is Jesus, right? This like the iconograph of a God on earth. And then you have someone saying like how he changed lives. And I'm over here changing lives by pulling out these questions and these answers out of my guests. And it's like pulling the power out to hand off to other people who listen to the podcast and get that motivation or what they're looking for to be a better version of themselves.
I know that you love to talk to people about the benefits of starting a podcast. What have been the benefits for you? Those can be financial, they could be networking, they can be personal, they can be social.
There's been a lot of benefits from starting my podcast. The first one is just the networking opportunities. it's insane how open people are to be a guest on the podcast. I've had a gentleman by the name of Travis Chappell, a huge podcaster, businessman, runs a platform called Guestio to find guests. And when he was launching, I just happened to be watching one of his live streams, and I commented, "Oh, I would love." I took a picture of it and said, "Investing in yourself, upgrading your skills to get better guests." And he said, "I would love to be a guest on your podcast." And I'm like, wait, what?" you know, and it's just connecting with these people who have never been in my area, who have not been in my network or even in my social circle, them willing to come on or asking to be a guest on the podcast. Like, it's insane. And the advice that they give you is like next level in understanding, like, and they're freely giving out the answers. And you're like, this would cost me thousands upon thousands of dollars, yet I'm getting it for free. So it's really been an investment in myself by doing these podcasts, because I get to have master classes one after another sometimes with these people who have done extraordinary things. And I'm over here. When I first started, I was in my bedroom. I was in my bedroom against the wall doing these, and then I moved into a living room where I had more space. But it was like, I can't, like, there's a disconnect. Like, you have these people on a yacht or, in these big, huge, exclusive houses, and then there's me sitting in my bedroom recording, asking these questions as if I'm a huge time business owner, and I'm not. I'm just this. I looked at myself as a kid doing this, and I've grown up a lot in the last 4 years that I've been doing this podcast, and it's very strange to see the change. And when I first started it 4 years ago to today, with this Invest in Yourself, the Digital Entrepreneur podcast.
What's the hardest part or the least enjoyable part of your podcast creative process today? Is it emails? Is it preparing notes? Is it working on a day that you wake up and you don't want to? There's got to be some part of this process that you no longer enjoy.
It's hard to say, because each part has its pros and cons. Like you said, like waking up on a Tuesday and I'm just like, I don't want to record today, or I don't feel like it's not there. And then I sit down in the chair, look over the notes for the guests and be like, wait, no, this could be an actual very interesting one. And then they come on, or I'm reading them, I'm like, I don't know. And then the whole thing turns around. So I guess what's tiring is me thinking that the podcast isn't going to be good. There's nothing about, obviously the editing's annoying, but then you can hire someone to take care of the editing. Then you have the uploading. Well, you can hire someone to take care of that. So there's nothing that I do right now that I despise greatly that will be like, no, Phil, no, we can't do it. It's probably just minor little things, like I'm just not in the mood until I sit in the chair, turn on the camera, and then turn on the Phil Better character to 11 and just have a great interview.
What's simple advice that you give to someone who talks about starting their own podcast as a way to invest in themselves, whether it be for networking like you or potentially trying to monetize it at some point? What's simple advice that you give them to get them to make the jump?
The simple advice is, if you're not going to do it, someone else is going to do it for you, and you're going to lose out.
I like it. A little bit of pressure.
Yeah, it's you have this idea, and I mentioned earlier that I don't follow religion. I'm very spiritual. I believe the universe. So if you want to call it God or whatever, the universe is going to put something in your brain, an idea. If you don't take it, he's just going to move on, or they will just move on and put it into someone else's brain and give them that idea. Because we all have this collective consciousness, and it's just ideas come to you. If I get an idea, I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. I'll write it down. And if I don't touch on it for a few days, I know someone else is going to have that idea. And it doesn't bother me, because I know it's going to be done and it's going to be created, and the world's going to be a better place with this idea out there. So it's just, whenever I hear someone says, oh yeah, I would love to do that, I'm like, why aren't you doing it? Well, no, it takes all this. I'm like, 600 interviews. I can tell you that it doesn't take any expertise to start something. You become an expert while doing it. If you don't do it, you're not an expert. So you'll never get to be an expert to do it. So you have to do it. Just do it. And if it fails, so what? No one's going to be upset with you if it fails. It's a failure. There's if you look at Henry Ford failed a lot of times. Elon Musk is failing Currently, you have Bill Gates who have failed. You have all these huge successful people who have failed in their life, but they never let it get it down. They've tried something, it didn't work, they move on, or they relook at it, reprocess it, and then try again until they get the process right. Everything in life is failing forward. That's what walking is. You're literally falling forward, and you're hoping your feet catch you.
You got to get a lot of pitches as guests. How many people would you say that you get pitched for you to choose one? Do you get 10 and you choose one? Is it bigger than that?
It depends on like the month or week, a month pretty much. Sometimes I'll get no pitches. I'm very lucky because I have created connections with some amazing podcast bookers that understand who my ideal guest is, and they come to me and they pitch me. And so generally a lot of the time when it comes from them, it's a yes automatically, because I've already had that conversation with them, and we've streamlined who I like and who I don't like as a guest. And I'm fairly open to everybody. Whether or not I release the episode, that's a completely different story. Anybody who comes on, they have to agree that I have the right to either air it or not air it. It's my property at the time of the episode. So if I don't feel that the episode's given out any great volume or value, I'm not going to release it unless I'm stuck and I don't have anyone for that week. Then I'll release it. But that's rarely happens. It's rare that I'll say no. It's probably 80% yeses to 20% no's, and the no's are just because I can't see the value for an entrepreneur to listen to this. And that's how I look at it. I look at this pitch and I'm like, will I get something out of it to help my business? If I can, then obviously I'm going to get them on, because there's someone outside like me looking for this advice, and I can ask that question that they have.
In terms of who you are when you don't have a microphone in front of you, how close is the Phil right now in front of me to who you are maybe in an hour or two? And where there are differences, how would you describe it to your audience?
The Phil that you're looking at now is probably a bit more professional than the everyday Phil. This is more of when I worked in the 9-to-5, the corporate version of me, where there's a bit of silliness, but it's more direct and more polished. And of course, it's turned up to about 11, more energetic. When I'm not outside, if I'm really a homebody, I love just being at home. So when I go out, it's usually Phil Better's out there, and when I'm at home, it's just Phil Lemire, which is my regular name. He's just a homebody, reading, playing video games, talking with family, just relaxed, not doing too much energetic wise. But the minute I step outside that door, I turn Phil Lemire off and turn Phil Better to 11, and we are going out.
I think I shared this with you when you interviewed me on your podcast. I was a podcaster in the long-term care space, and I have noticed, or at least my wife has noticed, when I don't have a microphone, they're starting to merge. She can tell that my questions when I'm around friends and family, if I'm having a beer or, having a coffee, I'm always asking questions and improving the craft of my question to find an interesting answer that not only is interesting to you, but it's interesting to me. I'm motivated by asking a better question, so you give me a better answer. Have you changed who you are after doing hundreds and hundreds of interviews as well?
I think so. I think my questions on my show have gotten better. I try not to do interviews outside. When I say interviews, I don't try and ask too many questions about people, because I know when you interview a lot of people that some people have a habit of interviewing others outside. But I think the way I ask questions has changed outside of the podcasting world. So I'm crying here because it's so emotional. No, I'm trying not to cough. But no, I think my questions that I ask are deeper questions outside of the interview, because I've noticed when you ask those surface level questions on a podcast, you get meh answers, and you have to really ask those interesting questions that tip tip it back into the favor of the interviewer getting the answers. So I'm guessing my questions that I ask, or if I'm in a conversation, they're not surface level. They go a bit deeper and try and understand the person as a whole.
You do a fair amount of your podcast actually around investing and financing. That's how you and I met, because you interviewed Kyle from Web Street. What are you looking for in those interviews? Are you thinking about how you're going to invest? Are you following up on questions that you know that your audience has? Like, how do you find your topics and make sure they're enjoyable to you, but at the same time to your audience?
I wasn't expecting these such great questions, Peter. But I have a very basic investment strategy. It's called an ETF, and I just put money into it. Simple as I do, I'm like, I don't know enough about the stock market to actually invest in stocks, because that's another level, or try and do trades and futures and derivatives and no, that's not my expertise. Is in podcasting. It's going to stay in podcasting. If there's a podcasting company looking for investment, I'll invest, but it's really into ETFs. So since I already know that I have my knowledge of investing is surface level, there's probably smarter people out there. So when I do ask these questions, I'm curious. I don't know anything about it. So I'm going to ask you about it, as coming from someone who has no idea about what you're doing. So I'm like, okay, explain to me what you mean by investing in a future, and how does that help, us now? Because I want to know. I'm a kid in a candy shop. How do you make the chocolate make good? I want to know every detail that you have. And if you drop something, I'm going to be like, wait, what do you mean by this? I don't understand this. And there's probably one or two people of my audience that don't. I look at it as, I'm not an interviewer. I'm not just asking these questions. I'm some person in a crowd, and you're giving a talk, and I want to know more. I'm going to hit you with things that I find interesting, or I want to know more about. So I pretend I'm the audience, and I'm like, will my audience like this? Is there something that this person has said that's going to pick up my audience flag, so that I can be like, oh, wait, no, this is important. I want to know more about this. Even though they want to talk over here, I'm like, no, we're going to concentrate over here. I want to know about this. So I try and be my audience. Will this be interesting to my audience? If it's interesting to me, that's great. Then I know at least one person's going to be interested in it. But overall, I'm always constantly thinking, is this question going to give me something that my audience can use? And that's all it is. Okay, this question gave me this answer. Is there a follow-up on there that I can do? And it's sometimes really bad, because as the guest is speaking, I'm thinking about the follow-up question. And so I may lose some gold. So I'm always going back to the transcript, and I'm rereading the transcript going, I could have followed up there. I could have followed up there. This is a good point. And what's great is I sometimes send out an email. We put it on pause, but we had a system where we would do a post interview, where we would put it on our website. So to help promote the podcast with follow-up questions to the answers that they gave, so that it's like, oh, why did he answer this? Well, you have to listen to the podcast to get the first half.
I like that. I hadn't thought. That's a lot of work, but I feel like it's an extra step that might be reap some benefits. When I was little, as a student in grade school or middle school, I thought that being the smartest person in the room was knowing the answer. And if you're going to ask a question, you tried to ask a question to show that you were smart. At some point in my life, I don't know if this was in college or a little bit afterwards, I realized that didn't matter to me. I just wanted to ask a question and know the answer. I didn't really care about the process, how I was perceived in asking the question. How did you become comfortable not being the smartest person in the room, asking AKA stupid questions because you didn't know how to ask it better? You just want the answer. You don't care how you sound.
That actually hasn't been a problem for me. I always believe that I'm the stupidest person in a room. I think I read a book a while ago that when I was younger, I've always been a reader. My father had books from John Grisham to, Tony Robbins, and he would be always reading different books and all that. And I realized if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. You're in a very dumb room. And since then, I've always been curious. So I'm not worried if someone says, wow, that's a dumb question. I'm like, yeah, it could be dumb for you, but I don't know the answer. So I'm going to ask this dumb question. And even though 90% of the people in here will know the answer, I don't care. I personally want to know the answer from you. I'm going to ask this question. If you say it's a stupid question, then I know you're not someone to listen to. Because the only stupid question is one that you don't ask. When you don't ask the question, that's the stupid question. Unless it's like you're talking to a farmer, you're a farmer, and you go, how do you farm? Maybe not the smartest question, but it also is a smart question because they may have a different technique than you that could pay off dividends for you or someone else. You know, like I get all this knowledge from all these entrepreneurs that I ask. Probably 99.99% of it, I will never use in my life because I'm not in that domain. I'm not doing the same things they're going. But if I'm talking with someone on a podcast and they ask me this question, I can go, you know what? I was talking with, Bill a couple of days ago and they said this, this, and this for their business. Now, this person who's interviewing me and their audience just gets this great piece of advice. Not me. I have nothing to do with it. But then they can go off and look up this person. Then they go, oh, wow, Phil really knows that person. And that's a great person, I look at it as like, I just like knowledge. I'm just going to ask questions until I die. And then I have this overused knowledge that no one needs to have, like random knowledge bits. That's all it is. I don't feel dumb asking questions.
As we start to wrap up, Phil, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, which was that you tend to be hypercritical of yourself. What's going on in your mind? Like when you feel that you should have done something better, what is it you're focusing on? Is it from a podcast point of view? Is it from an organization point of view? Tell me how you beat yourself up, because from a distance, you're very, very successful. So I want to understand this imposter syndrome between your two ears.
I'm very hard on myself in everything except for video games. I'm okay being a poor sport in video games. Like being bad at video games is fine. I could have done something. I could have asked the question better. I could have talked less and let my guests talk more. It probably comes back that I used to work in a call center, right, for a major financial institution. And that's the first warning, everybody, because they make you listen to your own calls. And then they ask you to criticize your calls. To say, what could you have done better? So I'm always now hypercritical of myself. What could I have done better for this podcast? What could I have done better in this interview? And it's always around podcasting. It's not business, because business comes and goes. I don't care. I will become a great businessman, period. End of discussion. I want to be the best podcaster. So I'm uber critical of myself. Like, okay, how could I have gotten the guest to give me an answer that wasn't fluff? Or how can I get the answer or ask this question that's going to motivate my audience to take the necessary steps to jump and become an entrepreneur? The podcast is really focused on people who are fed up of the 9 to 5 and they're feeling the burnout. It's where I was when I first started the podcast. And I'm always going to be critical of myself on that because it's my baby. This is what I created. So how can I make this better? And it's always going to be critical on that. Every other aspect of my life, I really don't care about. I'm happy in those regards. If I improve, great. But it's really the podcast where I'm the most critical because I want it to be the best podcast for my audience and to help as many people as I can with this platform and say, look, there's so many people out there that are making money either through the stock market, through creating their own business. Like we're at the age where entrepreneurship is the golden era. And I want to help people start their own little entrepreneurial adventure. If it's a side hustle and they have their main job, great. They have that money that they can go on vacation. I'm always critical. Like, how can I get the best episode out of my guest? Get the best answer out of my guest that will help the most people.
Love it. You kind of gave me a bump set spike for closure to this because, I asked you at the top of the show, at the top of the episode, what's feedback that you received, and you said not as much. And I want to say thank you as a person who's listened to multiple episodes before you and I met. I think you're doing a great job. It's amazing. I love your inspiration. Your energy is genuine. You're doing a kick-ass job. Thank you so much, Phil.
Stop it. I'm a Canadian. We can't take compliments. Jesus. This is the one thing everybody doesn't understand about Canadians. We don't do compliments really well. I thank you very much for that. And it's very nice to hear the feedback from someone who's listened to multiple episodes and has already been a guest on my podcast. So he doesn't have to butter me up to become a guest on my podcast.
I hope our paths will cross in life, real life, one day. Thanks, Phil.
It was a pleasure. And thank you so much, Peter. This was great.